The day they fired me, my CEO smiled like he had already won. He sat across the glass table in his expensive suit, folded his hands, and looked at me like I was just another file to be deleted. "Your services are no longer needed," he said. "Sign the papers, return your laptop, and leave quietly." That was the moment my life split into two parts. Before that day, I believed hard work meant something. After that day, I learned that in some companies, honesty is only valuable until someone richer decides to steal it. My name is Maya Collins, and for 7 years I gave everything I had to Orion Systems. I was not the loudest person in the room. I did not play office politics. I did not flatter executives or smile at fake jokes in the conference room. I came in early, stayed late, fixed what others broke, and built systems that made the company millions. Most people in that building only saw me as the quiet it girl. But behind the screens, behind the code, behind the entire financial automation system that kept Orion Systems running, I was the one holding everything together. And I had just finished something extraordinary. I had built a secure internal process that cut transaction errors by 83%, reduced fraud detection time by half, and saved the company enough money to impress two major investors. It was not just an improvement. It was a breakthrough. My patent was filed under the company's name because I trusted them. I believed in the promise I had been given. My manager said, "Maya, this is going to change your life." The CEO said, "You are the future of this company." I remember those words so clearly now, because they were the same people who later looked me in the eye and pretended I was nobody. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Monday morning. I walked into the office and noticed my access badge did not work at the main floor elevator. Then, my laptop password had been changed. Then an email from HR appeared in my inbox telling me to attend a private restructuring meeting. That phrase alone should have warned me. When I entered the glass conference room, the CEO, Mr. Daniel Reed, was already there with two lawyers and the head of HR. No one offered me water. No one asked me to sit comfortably. They had that cold, prepared look people wear when they have already decided your fate. Daniel Reed leaned back and said, "Maya, there has been a leadership decision." I said nothing. He continued, "We're moving in a different direction. Your position is being eliminated." I almost laughed because I knew that was a lie. My department had never been more important. Our system had never been more valuable. I said, "What exactly does that mean?" One of the lawyers slid a folder toward me. "It means your employment ends today. You will receive severance if you sign the agreement." I opened the folder, and there it was. The same architecture I had designed, the same process flow I had built, the same patent language I had written with my own hands. But the name on the paperwork was not mine. It was Daniel Reed's. My throat went dry. I looked up and asked, "Why is my patent under your name?" Daniel smiled slightly, like I had asked a child's question. "Because company intellectual property belongs to the company," he said. "That's what you signed." "I signed as an employee," I said. "I created that system. You know I did." He shrugged. "Prove it." I still remember how those two words sounded. Not angry, not defensive, just clean, cold, certain. "Prove it." That was when I understood the game. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a mistake. This was theft dressed up in legal language. He had done this before. I could feel it. He had the lawyers, the money, the board connections, the polished language, and the kind of confidence only corrupt men have when they think consequences are for other people. I asked him, "So this is it? 7 years of work? And you just take everything?" He looked at me with that fake patience rich men use when they think they are speaking to someone beneath them. "Life is unfair, Maya. Some people adapt. Some people leave." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the folder across the table. I wanted to say every truth I had been swallowing for years. But I did not. Because in that moment I realized something important. If I gave them anger, they would use it against me. If I gave them tears, They would call me unstable. If I fought them in their courtroom, they would bury me under money I did not have. So I stood up slowly, placed the folder back on the table, and said, "You will regret this." Daniel gave a soft, amused laugh. And that laugh became the sound I carried in my chest for the next 6 months. I walked out of Orion Systems with my laptop, my badge deactivated and my name erased from the building I had helped build. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and stared at the ceiling for hours. I did not cry at first. I kept replaying everything in my head, searching for the moment I should have seen it coming. I remembered the company dinners, where Daniel always asked me to explain my work in simple words while pretending he cared. I remembered the investor meeting where he interrupted me halfway through my presentation and then repeated my own idea as if it had just occurred to him. I remembered the day he said, "Maya, brilliant people like you are rare." At the time, I thought it was praise. Now I knew it was inventory. They had valued my mind, but not my name. And once they had taken what they wanted, they were ready to throw me away. The next morning, I called a lawyer, then another, then another. Every single one of them told me the same thing. "You may have a moral case, but legally, this is going to be very difficult. Large companies are protected. The contracts were written carefully. The company will drag this out until you run out of money." One lawyer actually told me, "To be blunt, Daniel Reed can afford to lose longer than you can afford to keep fighting." That sentence stayed with me too, because that is how power works in the real world. It does not always win by being right. It wins by being able to wait. For a while, I tried to do things the normal way. I collected every email, every meeting note, every timeline, every version of the original design files. I found old backups, screenshots, and a few carefully saved messages from my private account showing the work was mine. I even managed to get an appointment with a law firm that looked promising. But once they saw who I was up against, their energy changed. They became polite in the kind of way people are polite when they do not want to help you. A week later, they told me they could not take the case. That was the second time I felt abandoned. The first time was by the company. The second time was by the system. And after that, something in me changed. Not into rage, not into chaos, into silence. The kind of silence that grows roots. The kind of silence that listens. The kind of silence that waits. I stopped calling lawyers. I stopped begging for help. I stopped posting anything online. To the outside world, it looked like I had disappeared. But inside, I was watching. Orion Systems had one weakness. Daniel Reed believed in control, but he did not believe in detail. He liked to stand at the top and let other people handle the messy parts. He trusted numbers when they looked good. He trusted reports when they were clean. He trusted systems as long as they made him look brilliant. And that, more than anything, became his undoing. I knew the company's internal structure better than anyone because I had built part of the financial automation pipeline myself. I knew the rhythm of the reports. I knew which departments rushed during quarter close. I knew how acquisitions changed the flow of approval. I knew what the executives checked. And I knew what they never checked. I did not do anything dramatic. I did not break into anyone's office. I did not steal documents. I did not leave threatening messages. I did not become reckless. I simply began observing. I studied the cracks in the machine Daniel thought was perfect. And the more I watched, the more I saw that the company's systems were full of hidden arrogance. Too much trust in automation. Too many shortcuts buried inside layers of polished compliance language. Too many people saying, "It's probably fine," instead of asking hard questions. The biggest one was Daniel himself. He had hidden money offshore for years. I did not know that at first. I only knew he was too wealthy for a man whose salary could not possibly explain his lifestyle. The private plane weekends. The sudden property purchases. The expensive art in his office. The way his wife always wore jewelry that looked too expensive for someone who was supposedly just living comfortably. People like Daniel always leave traces. They think money erases guilt, but money usually just hides it until the right light hits. And I knew where the light was going to hit. Orion Systems had been preparing for its biggest acquisition in company history. A rival firm wanted to buy them for hundreds of millions. That meant due diligence. That meant audits. That meant every account, every ledger, every paper trail would suddenly be under a microscope. Daniel was so obsessed with making the acquisition look clean that he spent months bragging about it in meetings. "This is the deal that changes everything," he said. "This is the one that puts us on the map. This will prove Orion is built for the future." He was speaking to the board, to investors, to the press, but what he really meant was, "This will make me richer than ever." What he did not know was that I was still listening, still learning, still waiting. In my own time, in my own space, I began carefully building what I thought of as a mirror. Not a weapon, a mirror. Something that would reflect the truth back at the people who had spent years hiding it. I studied their system architecture with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. I watched how data moved. I watched how reports were generated. I watched how approvals were signed off. I watched how a company could pretend to be honest while quietly feeding lies into the bloodstream. And I found a pattern, a path, a quiet vulnerability deep inside the financial automation process. Not a hole big enough to cause public harm to innocent workers. Not something reckless. Just enough to force the truth into the open when the company was most vulnerable and most visible. That was the plan. Not destruction for destruction's sake. Exposure. Accountability. Justice. If justice could still exist in a world like this. For months, I lived like a ghost. I worked a part-time contract job during the day and spent my nights preparing. I paid my bills carefully. I saved every dollar. I took long walks when I felt too angry to sit still. Some nights I sat by the window and imagined Daniel Reed in his office, laughing with the board, thinking he had buried me forever. I imagined his smug face. I imagined his voice saying, "Prove it." And each time, I told myself the same thing. I will. The acquisition date finally arrived. The whole company buzzed with fake excitement. Executives moved faster. Emails became sharper. Everyone was suddenly smiling too much. Daniel Reed wore his victory like cologne. He gave speeches about growth, trust, innovation, and leadership. He told the employees that Orion Systems had nothing to hide. That was almost poetic in a sick sort of way, because the more he said it, the less true it sounded. On the morning of the final board presentation, I was sitting in a small apartment across town, staring at my computer screen, hands perfectly still. My heart was beating hard, but my mind was calm. I had already done the hard part. Now it was time to let the truth speak. The board meeting began at 9 a.m. The acquisition team joined by video. The auditors were present. The legal team was present. Daniel Reed stood at the front of the room looking exactly like the kind of man who believes charm can replace character. He smiled for the cameras. He talked about growth. He praised the team. He claimed the company had never been stronger. Then the financial dashboard came up on the screen behind him. At first, everything looked normal. That was the beauty of it. Nothing happened too early. No explosion. No drama. No warning that would let him prepare a defense. Just a few minor inconsistencies. A delayed reconciliation. A duplicated internal note. A strange transaction trail that did not match the executive summary. Daniel squinted at the screen. One of the finance officers frowned. Someone asked a question. Another person said, "That seems odd." And then the next layer opened. A cross-reference, then another, then a buried set of transfer records, then an offshore account chain, then hidden beneficiary links, then payments that did not belong in any legitimate company flow. The room changed in seconds. The air went cold. The board member stopped smiling. The legal team leaned forward. The acquisition lawyers started talking all at once. Daniel's face lost color so fast it was almost beautiful. "What is this?" he snapped. No one answered right away, because the truth was already speaking for itself. His hidden accounts had surfaced in the very system he thought was too controlled to betray him. Every attempt to close the report only triggered more connected records. Every attempt to pause the presentation only exposed more. There were shell entities. There were private transfers. There were suspicious relationships with vendors. There were patterns that suggested the company had not just been mismanaged. It had been used. And now the entire board was staring at the evidence. Daniel turned to the chief financial officer and shouted, "Fix it! But you cannot fix truth once it starts breathing." One of the auditors said, "We need to stop this meeting immediately." Another voice asked, "How long has this been going on?" Then the questions became faster. When did this start? Who approved these transfers? Why were these accounts not disclosed? Who had access? Who knew? And that, of course, was the question Daniel feared most. Because he knew someone had known. He knew someone had been inside the system. He knew there had to be a person behind the timing, but he did not know who. Not yet. The company's board demanded an emergency review. The acquisition was paused on the spot. Federal regulators were notified within hours. By that evening, Orion Systems was under investigation. By the next day, Daniel Reed was no longer the untouchable man he had pretended to be. The same legal armor he had used to crush me started cracking under its own weight. Because once the regulators saw the offshore structure, they kept digging. And once the board realized the acquisition might collapse, they began protecting themselves instead of protecting him. That is the truth about powerful men. They look loyal until loyalty becomes expensive. Then they disappear. I did not watch the fallout from inside the building. I watched from my apartment, on a quiet laptop screen, with the curtains half closed and my hands resting in my lap. I did not smile at first. I just sat there, still, breathing, listening. The headlines came later. Orion Systems delays acquisition amid financial irregularities. Federal review opens into executive transfers. CEO Daniel Reed refuses comment. Then the internal leaks started. Whistleblower rumors, board conflict, executive panic, people suddenly remembering things they had ignored for years. No one said my name, of course. Not at first. But names have a strange way of returning when the truth gets loud enough. 3 days later, I received a call from one of the board members. His voice sounded tired. "Miss Collins," he said, "we need to speak with you." I was quiet for a moment. Then I asked, "Do you still think I'm the problem?" He did not answer that. He only said, "We were not aware of the full situation." That line almost made me laugh. Not aware. That is what powerful people always say when the damage is finally visible. I said, "You weren't aware because you didn't want to be." He did not argue. That was enough. I met with the investigators 2 days later. I brought my records, my original drafts, my archived emails, my timestamps, my notes, everything I had quietly preserved. I did not go in like a victim. I went in like a witness. And when they asked me whether I believed Daniel Reed had stolen my patent, I answered calmly, "I know he did." When they asked why I waited so long, I told them the truth. Because every door I knocked on was locked by money. So I waited for the one moment when the truth would open it for me. That part, they remembered. Because it was simple, and because it was true. Daniel Reed eventually stepped down. Then he was suspended. Then his legal team started running. Then the accounts began unraveling. Then the board discovered even more than they expected. And all the while, the company that had once treated me like a disposable employee was forced to ask itself a very ugly question. How many people had they hurt just to protect one man? For me, the ending was not loud. There was no dramatic courtroom victory, no giant paycheck, no public apology in front of cameras. Life does not always give clean endings, but I did get something better. My name, my work, my proof. The patent was finally corrected. The original documentation was restored. My role in the system was acknowledged. And for the first time in years, I felt like my voice had weight again. A month later, I stood outside the new office building I had been invited to consult for. The morning air was cool. Cars passed by. People hurried into their own lives. And I realized something I never expected to feel. Peace. Not happiness. Exactly. Not victory in the loud way movies show it. Something quieter, stronger. The kind of peace that comes when a person who was crushed by silence finally learns how to make silence speak. Daniel Reed had tried to erase me. Instead, he exposed himself. He had built his empire on greed, arrogance, and the belief that nobody small could ever touch him. But he forgot one thing. Small people remember everything. Small people notice everything. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding the truth that will end the whole game. So no, I did not destroy him with anger. I did not destroy him with revenge. I simply let his own greed lead him into the light. And when that light came on, there was nowhere left for him to hide. That is the part people never understand about justice. It does not always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper, a pattern, a delay, a hidden line in a report, a door left open just enough for truth to walk through. And when it does, every lie begins to shake. Every stolen thing starts to burn. Every powerful man who thought he was untouchable finally learns the one lesson he should have learned long ago. You can steal someone's work. You can steal their credit. You can steal their future for a while. But you cannot steal the truth forever. Not from someone who is patient. Not from someone who is quiet. And definitely not from someone who has already been underestimated once too often. My name is Maya Collins. They fired me.